Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Always a pleasure to come back to Alma Mater. I'm wearing my scarf to prove it. I asked them to, I'm older than everybody else. I have to have lights. So we'll go back when we show the picture there. I was just thinking of, as Dr. Smalls talked so wonderfully and eloquently about the importance of the archival process and how it informs history. And sometimes we overlook the anecdotal, the connections that are so very important. And I was thinking just one incident leading to what I'm about to say is 1963. And I was a young professor here at Howard University at that time. That's you'll see a picture. Langston Hughes came to the university to receive an honorary degree. And I was asked to drive him around town so he could reconnect and have some of the experiences that he had as a young man here in this city. And so he wanted to go over to the Wardman Park Hotel, which is now the Marriott, Wardman Marriott, I think, or something like that. Anyway, it's the big hotel on the hill over by Connecticut Avenue. And so I drove him over there. And he said, this is where I was a busboy. And he said, one night I recognized a speaker from, rather a writer from the Washington Post having dinner. And I ran back in the men's room and scribbled a poem on a napkin and brought it out to him. And he said, and he was kind enough to accept it. And so the next day he wrote an article in the Washington Post that said, Negro busboy who is a poet. And later on I learned that that was the emphasis for the story and naming of the beginning of the restaurants, busboy and poet. And had I not driven Langston around that afternoon, I would not have experienced that story. And then he also asked me to take him over to Georgia Douglas Johnson's house down on S Street. And I drove him there, and I won't try and tell the whole story. But it was one of the little row houses, I think between 13th and 14th, somewhere. There ought to be a marker there now because she lived there. It was the Harlem Renaissance poet here in Washington. And he said, as we were about to go in, he said, now, she's gonna want to serve us lemonade. And he said, but we can't drink it. And he said, but we'll have to pretend that we're drinking it. Otherwise, we won't ever get a full story about Georgia Douglas Johnson. And so sure enough, as we went in, we couldn't go into the living room because there were newspapers and books stacked high in the door. We couldn't go through the dining room, so we had to go into the kitchen where there was this big old refrigerator with a thing on top making noise. And so around all of that, we eventually went into the living room. And as we sat down, Miss Johnson came in and offered us lemonade and peppermint candy. And the candy was all pink. It had melted all together. And he was like, no. Don't. And the lemonade was cloudy. And he jokingly said, now, she may have had that lemonade since she worked for Booker T. So the question was, how are we going to not drink this lemonade at this esteemed woman's house? And he said, she's going to go back into the kitchen to get some more peppermint candy. and we'll have the glass up to our mouth like this, like we're drinking, and when she leaves, we'll pour it in the flowers. So, I mean, it has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about, but, you know, I figure at 86, I just talk about what I want to. I came to Howard 1949, and I'm not going to tell that story because it's too long, uninvited, and insisted on going to class when I hadn't registered and all of that. And so what I'm about to show you, it will count some of the journey of beginning sketches and things like that, and the emphasis on archival materials that artists very often don't pay attention to. And the historians and scholars, archivists, very often do come later and say, well, this is important, you know, don't throw that away, keep it, and so forth. So I was told by my teachers here at Howard that I should keep all of my materials, my drawings and what have you. And I've kept a lot of them, about maybe 50,000 items in the archives at the Driskell Center. And hopefully they will be helpful to scholars. The Library of Congress has collected some of the sketchbooks, and most of them are still in my own possession. In recent years, scholars in the discipline of art history have increasingly turned their attention to artist notes. Yeah, that might help. Thank you. You gotta help old folk out now. You can't just assume that they can. To artist notes and sketchbooks as important primary research tools in their pursuit of a more accurate review of the creative intentions of the artist. And while art historians are trained to read the signs and symbols of a visually coded history, they nonetheless benefit measurably from reviewing letters, artist notes, sketches, and drawings, as they often help define the subject of finished works of art. At the archive, as I mentioned, at the Driskell Center at the University of Maryland, can be found more than 200 of my drawings and several thousand letters of exchange between artists and myself, such as Elizabeth Catlett, Romare Bearden, Lois Jones, Jacob Lawrence, Aaron Douglas, and other African-American artists, some of which contain sketches. Also letters from George O'Keeffe and a few other people. From Giorgione Vasari to Romare Bearden, artists have provided us with positive results of having first-hand accounts of artistic process, of methodology, and personal admissions relating to the practice of their craft. And I'm able to recall when teachers in various art classes at colleges and university levels required each student enrolled in painting, printmaking, and design classes to maintain an up-to-date sketchbook as a preliminary requisite for classroom assignments. That is what was required of me as an art student here at Howard University in the 1950s. It is my understanding that sketchbooks are not in use as often in current art study as they were in previous years. But over the past 6 decades, I have used sketchbooks to record studies relating to subjects that I have undertaken as paintings and print projects. And in some cases, I have drawn in sketchbooks as a means of recording my own travel, offering a written account of immediate impressions that can be rendered or referenced later. Some of my first sketchbook notes took place in the early 1960s when I was a young professor at Talladega College in Alabama during the Civil Rights era. And my first travel abroad took place in the summer of 1964. And by then, I was a young professor teaching studio art and art history here at Howard University. I received a fellowship that summer, the summer of 1964, from the Rockefeller Foundation, the government of the Netherlands, and the Harmon Foundation. And before settling for 6 weeks of study of Dutch, and Flemish art at Rijksbureau voor Consistorisch Documentatie in The Hague. I pursued independent study in Greece, Italy, and Spain, traveling first to Athens in early June. And I was photographed. We had a wonderful symposium down at the National Gallery of Art about 3 weeks ago, and we were talking about the Skurlock studios and what have you, and I was photographed down on 9th Street for my first passport at that time at Skurlock. Now, after flying all night from JFK International Airport in New York, we arrived the following morning at the Athens, Greece International Airport. And after checking in to the Hotel Academia in downtown Athens, I proceeded to begin a series of sketches and drawings that took me to the Acropolis, and that's where I was on my way there, and to the port city of Piraeus, and the adjacent city as far away as Corinthus. So now I'm just going to show a few of those sketches. And Professor Herring was the founder of the art department at Howard University. He founded it in 1921, and I arrived here in 1949. I was not an art student at that time, but later on I became an art student. So in the classes, and then even later, we would do sketches. This is a later sketch. And this is from a smaller sketchbook, but these were just from ordinary sketchbooks, nothing major about this. When I arrived at Talladega to teach down there in 1955, the civil rights movement was underway, and importantly, the meetings that were held, for example, on the campus, attorney Arthur Shores, who was Arthurine Lucy's civil rights lawyer, came. He was on the board of trustees at Talladega, and he came, and of course the notes and what have you relating to that. And also we met at the various churches, plotting and planning what the goals and objectives would be. James Foreman, the sketch here, was there that night. The next, and a writer from Denmark was there also, and occasionally I would scribble a little poem or something underneath these. And then in Europe, in Venice in this case, I carried my ink and sketchbook with me, and now I'm on my way to Holland, where I'm going to study the drawings of Rembrandt and the etchings and what have you. So I'm in preparation for that on the way. And that's another one of the drawings from that same series. A drawing in Amsterdam, downtown Amsterdam. In Utrecht, yes. In Rome, yes. And in between where I was, I draw a chair or whatever. And chairs to me have played a very significant role in my artistry over the years, because to me they're so important in the sense of defining aspects of history, who we are. We never know who sat in that chair. So I have this notion that whoever sat there left some of their own personal being in that chair. And so for me, I'm always thinking, who sat there, what did they do, what were they like, and so forth and so on. So it's not that I'm just painting Americana or drawing Americana. I'm trying to fit personalities within the scope of these chairs. The only one of my sketchbooks in which I did typing and inserting drawings was my first trip to South Africa in September of 1972. And so giving an account of getting there and what have you, but that's the only one in which there was typing. In Senegal in 1969, I think, just recording my reaction being first on the island of Goree and seeing people in their dress and their costumes and what have you. Now, much of what my painting that takes place, based on the archival materials that I sometimes carry with me, but sometimes what I'm doing, this takes place at the studio in Falmouth, Maine, and the house adjacent to it that we've been going there since 1961. And I do a lot of gardening there. The next one shows you the gardening. Don't go to Whole Foods spending whole paycheck. And there's spots around the place. The bridge at Falmouth is the next one, and it's a very kind of iconic place for me where I go down. There are water lilies in the brook, and there are trout in the brook also. And that's my Giverny. I go down there and sit and draw and sketch and what have you. The next is drawings from the forest, and people very often say to me, "You still doing those pine trees?" And I said, "Yes, I'm still doing the pine trees because they don't talk back to you, and they don't, you don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to slap you or do anything like that." So yeah, I'm still doing pine trees. My place is surrounded by pines there, and you see the studio there and the little brook in front, not the trout brook, but another brook that runs down in front. And just ordinary sketches of the nearby area, but all of these are part and parcel of the sketchbook series, yes. And a number of summers have gone up to, let me go back to that one. It's not showing up. Okay, I was about to show you a sketch from up at the Haystack School in Deer Isle, Maine. But we'll go on to the next. A drawing with an account of being in Buenos Aires, Argentina, en route to Patagonia. The next, please. And my own front yard in Hyattsville, the garden. We have about a half-acre of gardening that goes on there. I don't garden as much as I used to, but there's some that still takes place. All these things are still exciting to me, just to see nature moving about. The studio, that's a drawing of the studio we saw earlier in Falmouth. A view from the little town in, I guess, Deer Isle, Maine, where Haystack is located. In 1989, one of the African trips up out in the countryside near the Sanufu People's Ring, yes. And as you can see, I give accounts of, so I can have memory of what I did and where I was and all of this. This was when I was visiting Elizabeth Catlett in Cuernavaca, I think in 1983. It may have been 85, but I think it was 1983. And the beautiful surroundings in that lovely city that in Cuernavaca, central Mexico. Yes, the next one. Also from the visit with Elizabeth and Pancho. In Brazil, amongst the women in Salvador, Bahia, they dress pretty much the same in other cities like in Cachoeira. And having gone there numerous times, I do quick sketches and accounts of my visit there, yes. And the dance and of the martial arts and so forth. This is also in Brazil from the hotel where I was staying. The mother house in Cachoeira, which is where there's this beautiful architecture that echoes the Afro-Brazilian, or I should say Portuguese style that is Baroque in nature over there. Another view from the hotel window in Salvador, Bahia. And another view of the city looking out in what is now one of the more fashionable parts of the city. But when I first went there in 1983, it was not one of the safest parts of the city, but now it is, you know, one of the chic areas. And Gilberto Gil was the great singer, one of the great singers of modern Brazil, in a concert one night. And he became the first cultural minister of African ancestry, minister of culture, I should say, in Brazil. When I was on the advisory board of the National Endowment for the Arts, and we'd be sitting there trying to decide who was going to get grants and what have you, and I was busy drawing and taking notes and what have you, and that's what I would do in meetings. In Tokyo, in just very quickly, let's run very quickly through we can just go right ahead. Tokyo and Ginza with the lights, and the China diary. This is one of the diaries that's at the Library of Congress. Yes, just keep quickly. From China. Keep going. All these from the China diary. The Egyptian diary in 1990. In Chile, yes. Just musical themes. Still life, whatever. In Turkey, in the museum, sketching. That's also in Turkey, in Cappadocia. Yes, churches there. Yes. Continue. In South Africa, going back to there, and then of course near the end, just a combination of books where I make artist books with sketches. From Tuscany, where we sometimes go in the summer, in Italy, yes. And the farm there where they do the prosciutto. That's from Tuscany also. Yes. That should be it. Thank you.